Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and I am going to be bringing you through an exploration of the Jewish Torah, which is, for Christians, it's known as the first five books of the Bible. For Jews, it's the Torah, and it's broken up into 54 parts. And over the next year, I'll be doing an exploration of the Torah, one Parsha at a time, from my perspective as an atheist. So I'm doing this because I've been an atheist most of my adult life. I kind of came out as an atheist when I was about 18. I realized there's no God. Religion is basically made up. Um, but I was already indoctrinated. I mean, I already had a religious brain. My brain was shaped by religion before I was old enough to know any better. And because of that, I've had a lifelong curiosity and fascination with religion. And what we're going to be doing is exploring the Jewish text, the Torah, which again, it's the first five books of the Bible, um, according to Jewish tradition, which in Jewish tradition, you read a Parsha a week. This has been going on for many centuries. Jews have been reading the Torah one part at a time. And it it's a little bit different from how maybe Christians read the Bible. Um, I know Christians read the Bible, they read the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they don't spend that much time in the Old Testament. They spend most of their time in the New Testament. And Jews read the Tanakh. We mostly read the Torah and the Haftarah, the prophets. Um, so there's all different kinds of ways of doing it. But I'm going to be doing it according to Jewish tradition. Um, and because I'm a Jew. And that's about it, really. Uh, the Parsha, oh yeah, the Parsha is it's not the same thing as a like a chapter or something. A parsha is a portion of the Torah. And each parsha, it has something to do with whatever that particular reading is about. Like we're going to start with Bereshit, which is the beginning. It's the beginning. Sometimes a parsha is just named after the first word that's in that part. Sometimes it's named after a character. Like later on in the parsha, we'll be getting to Yitro or Jethro, which is in Exodus, and that's named after a particular individual. Um, it's different. There's 54 of them, so there's 54 names, and I'll explain all of this as we go. So there'll be plenty of time. Each Atheist Torah study is about an hour. We probably won't get through the whole Torah portion, and we won't even be following the triennial cycle. I thought about following the triennial cycle, which is so the triennial cycle is something that Jews do. Some Jews do it, and what we do is the portion is so long, like Bereshit, I think is 1,700 words or something like that. It's six chapters of the Bible. It's a long read, and so to break it up even more, they break it up into thirds, and they read a third of each parsha every year. And so this year, the parsha starts with chapter 5 of Genesis, of Bereshit. And it's a very boring start. it's um, it's the names of the children of Adam and Eve and it's just like it's Methuselah and all those people. It gets kind of, it's not the best way to start. So that's my cat, by the way. That's Baby the cat. I think you just see part of her head there. Anyways, We're not going to start there because the best part of the Torah is actually the very beginning, and it goes downhill from there pretty fast. So, anyways, that's where we're going to start. I'm not sure what else to say before we begin. I'll be talking mostly from this commentary, I'll be talking about the Torah from my perspective as an atheist. So I'm going to be deconstructing it through the lens of an atheist. I'll also be referring occasionally to Jewish tradition. I'll probably be referring a lot to Jewish tradition. And occasionally I might bring up something that the Christians have to say too, but mostly Jewish tradition. Um, Feel free to turn me off if you find this boring. I'm not here to, you know, you don't have to pay attention if you don't want to. This is just this is basically for me. I'm just doing this for me. It's just something I've wanted to do for a long time, but I'm also doing it for anyone who is an atheist and kind of struggles with religious texts because I mean, I find really like part of me is just like, why don't we just forget about these religious texts? They're just stupid and they don't really tell us anything about the world. But that's not really true. I mean, these are texts that people clinged to, they killed each other over. Um, they obviously had deep personal meaning for hundreds of millions of people. And even if they're not true, um, they're still true to the people who believe them. And that means something. And so for me as an atheist, I try to understand why do people feel this way about their religious texts? Why do they feel this way about this part of their brain, of their world that they call the divine? And, you know, this is one way that people try to understand. I don't know. It could be, who knows? We'll be talking about what it is. The whole year, we'll be talking about what it is because it's not God. I mean, it is God, but it's not because God is nothing. There is no God. But God is also something because all of these people collectively believe in it. It could be, as the author of Sapiens writes, it could just be this commonly held illusion. It could be kind of the grease that gears the wheels of a complex society, having a commonly held and shared imaginary set of ideas that creates an equal playing field that everyone can operate under, a common set of cultural expectations. Um, of course, it's also an answer to people's deepest held desire to know how did the world start. The world started the universe as we understand it started at the Big Bang. Earth started with the formation of our solar system 4.5 billion years ago, but when the people wrote the Torah, they didn't have that information. They didn't know how the world started. They didn't even know there was outer space. I mean, they knew there was a sky, but they didn't know what it was. And they didn't even know that the earth was round. I mean, the Greeks figured it out, but people didn't really understand that much. And this is some of their deepest work to understand. And a lot of it's very, very personal too. I mean, this is something people still do because it makes sense to them. I mean, it still has really deep meaning. And it's, even though we have science, even though we have, a lot of us are educated now. When this was written, most people were illiterate. They didn't have any education. But a lot of people still practice this. And, it's also been something terrible. I mean, the book itself is terrible. I mean, when you read the book itself, it's just full of all sorts of horrifying things, and it almost starts off that way. We'll get into it. Anyways, let's get into it because there's a lot to talk about, and let's just get into it. That's the best way to do it. Like I said, we probably won't get through the whole thing. It's 6 chapters, so if you have a Bible, if you have a Tanakh, this is the Aristarch scroll. This is a Tanakh. It's in this one's just in English, so you can also get them in English and Hebrew. I'm actually going to be using Safaria, which is safaria.org. If you want to follow it, Safaria is a great online resource for Jewish digital learning. It's a great place to learn Torah, to learn Tanakh, to learn commentary, to learn about Jewish tradition, the holidays, everything. So I'm actually going to be using Safaria. And then, of course, I also have lots of commentaries. I'll have different commentaries with me every week that we can refer to. The one that I always use all the time is one of my favorites. Uh, it's the commentary on the Torah by Richard Friedman. So that's a really good Torah commentary. I think Richard Friedman is an atheist. I'm not absolutely certain if he's an atheist or not, but I love this book. It's been so insightful and helpful in helping me to understand the Torah. And then, of course, this was my first book of Torah commentary, which I just love. It's In the Image of God. It's a feminist Torah commentary. And it was written, I think it was written in the 80s. I don't know. It was written at that time when kind of like the feminist Jewish spirituality was really on the ascension. And of course, now within Jewish tradition, there's more of an integration of like feminist ideas about, I mean, incorporating more and more ideas about what feminism means into the tradition. And I really appreciate that because the Torah is just so horribly patriarchal. It's just beyond belief. I mean, it's just so intolerable. But so anyways, that's another commentary. It's great. So those are all really good. But nowadays, yeah, when I started this, I mean, we were already deep into the digital age, but I did a lot of my learning through texts, and now I just do almost everything digitally. And it's it's good to go back to books because when you are looking at a book, you kind of have to do a different kind of thinking. You can't just look something up. So I recommend using books and using digital texts. They're both great. Anyways, I'm talking way too much. If I was actually leading a Torah study by now, everybody would have left. So let's get started. Oh, by the way, first I'm going to start with the blessing for Torah study. This is a blessing that Jews say before they begin to study the Torah. I'm not going to do the English translation. I'm just going to do the Hebrew, but you can go look it up if you want. Just reformedjudaism.org is a really good place to find information. This is the Hebrew blessing for Torah study, and it goes Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotah tivitzanu lasok dvrei Torah. Sorry, I knew that by heart, but I'm just like reading and I'm just getting confused. So anyways, that's the blessing for Torah study. The reason I'm not going to say the English is because it's praising our sovereign God. And since I'm an atheist, even though I just said it in Hebrew, I'm not going to also say it in English because I'm not praising a sovereign God. So I just got to be honest with you. I'm not praising any sovereign God. So here goes. Bereshit, in the beginning. In the beginning, Bereshit chapter 1, verse 1. When God began to create heaven and earth. So here at the very beginning, we have a it's a creation mythology. Now this book of Torah was written last. So after the rest of the Torah was written, oh, by the way, the Torah. Okay, so what is the Torah? What is it? Some people say, okay, in Jewish tradition, they say the Torah was written by Moses. Of course, that's um, some people still believe that. I've never actually met anyone who actually believes that, but I hear that some people do believe that the entire book of Torah was written by Moses. Now, so then this you start going down rabbit holes right away. So then who was Moses? Well, Moses didn't really exist, but a lot of people believe Moses existed. Moses is from my perspective as an atheist, Moses is like Superman, Superman. What a terrible analogy. Whatever, just name any collectively constructed mythology of any person, or some ancient deity. Moses is a construction. Moses is this character. Yeah, they use a character from a book. That's better. Just like Moses, he's a character from a book. Moses is um, a collection of ideas about what an authoritarian patriarch, leader, a founder of a nation is supposed to look like. So to the people who wrote the Torah, which is like lots of people wrote the Torah, but to the people who wrote the Torah and the people who redacted it, part of what they did was they created this character named Moses. And Moses is an embodiment of so many different things. It's a complex psychological character. And more than anything, Moses is something that you're supposed to carry inside of yourself. Just like for Christians, Jesus is, I know people say, oh, Jesus, he's the Son of God. He's, something separate from you. He died on a cross, whatever, all that stuff. But this is something I think Christians understand too. Like for Christians, when they look at Jesus, they're not just looking at this character that's in a story. They're actually taking that same story and they're reflecting it back in themselves. So they're internalizing the narrative, and the narrative becomes part of their identity. And it's the same with Moses. Like Moses is a character, and he's also somebody who's very relatable, and his character as an individual relates back into the story. So much so, this character is so much a part of the story that he's actually given authorship of the story. So, according to Jewish tradition, Moses wrote the Torah. He went up on top of a mountain, he talked to God, and God made him write it all down on stone tablets, the Torah. And then he came down from the mountain, and there it was. He had the whole thing. So that's Jewish tradition. What does the scholarship say? The scholarship says the Torah was redacted probably around 500. I hate this word BCE. I really hate that word. We gotta come up with a new way of marking time. I just have to be honest. The way we mark time according to Christian tradition, it's just stupid. There's nothing that happened in 0 AD that's worth marking as the beginning of time. In Jewish tradition, which isn't any better because it's like Jewish tradition marks time from like the beginning of creation. So like this very first verse. So like right now, I think what are we 5775 or something like that. I'll have to look that up later. Sorry, don't take my word for that. Anyways, we're in like 5,700 something. But that's not a mark of time either. We're actually in like 14.3 something billion years since the beginning of the universe. But that's all meaningless. It's all meaningless. But around 500 BCE, around the beginning of kind of the return from Babylon, is when the Torah was really redacted and put back together. Now, how did the Torah get written? That is a really complicated story. And part of it is we don't really have enough information. I mean, just like any story, like, or if you're trying to trace cultures and the origins of cultures, if you study anthropology, if you study sociology, you learn all this stuff. I mean, you don't really get the information you need. What you've got is the propaganda, the product of a kingdom. So, I mean, another way to look at the Torah is that it was political propaganda created by a kingdom, and this is their story. But we actually know a lot about the people who wrote the Torah. We know that they were Jews. We know that they were creating Jewish tradition. They were actually creating what we know now to be Jews, what we know now to be Judaism. This is kind of like the founding documents of it. So, in some ways, Judaism was created out of the creation of these texts, in the same way that America, whatever America is, was created out of a bunch of rich white men getting together and writing down a document on a piece of paper. That then the language created the boundaries, and here it's kind of the same thing. The language of the Torah created the boundaries of the religion. It kind of helped create the meaning of the people, of the nation. It created a story for to justify the existence of an elite and to give a people an identity. So, that's one way of understanding it. It's also something that was created. Um, so, anyways, going back, just a little. I really want to get back to the text, but I go off a lot. So, the Torah was redacted. It's a series of stories, and it was redacted. Um, it was probably redacted by people returning from Babylonian exile. So what happened was that there were. This is the Levant, which is the Iron Age, the Bronze Age. We're in the Bronze Age, and the Levant is kind of what was known at the time as the Fertile Crescent, which is like the Tigris Euphrates rivers, what was then different empires, the Assyrian Empire, the Akkadian Empire, and the Babylonian Empire. And the Babylonian Empire played a huge impact, had a huge impact on the development of the kingdom of Israel. And what the Babylonians did was the Babylonians were like the Romans. In some ways, they were like the Romans. They were also like the Assyrians and the Akkadians before them, which are like four different empires that kind of existed, before modernity, not before modernity, like way back, like back in the Bronze Age, all the way through the Iron Age. But anyways, so they were these different empires, and they had a big role in shaping of culture and society in the Levant, in the Middle East, which is kind of the foundation of Western civilization. It's not the found. It doesn't have anything to do with the foundation of any other civilization. So we're not talking about Asia. We're not talking about North and South America. Australia. Each of those cultures had their own separate trajectory. Uh, this is just kind of some of the origins of Western culture are here in the Fertile Crescent. So what happened was the Babylonians, they went around conquering all of the neighboring kingdoms, but they didn't. They did things a little differently. So they would capture the elites within those societies. So like the kings, the priests, the wealthy people. They would take the elites. They brought them back to Babylon, and they made them like tell everybody their story. And this is actually a really strong theory for how the Torah was written. So they would capture these people. They didn't take the whole country. They just took the elites and they left the rest of the people there. They had to pay taxes to the Babylon, to the tribute. They would take the elites, they brought them back. And this was sort of like a way, from the perspective of the Babylonians, it was a way of having your cake and eating it too. So you could take the elites, but you could leave the people so that they wouldn't all go to war with you. And you would make them pay taxes to you. And you also sort of took their narratives and you put their narratives into your own narrative. So the Romans did a little bit of that. I mean, of course, the Romans did it in the biggest way imaginable when they adopted Christianity as their religion, because the Romans basically perpetuated the Roman Empire through adopting Christianity. And that's like just one example of many of how cultural ideas assimilate. And this is kind of, the Babylonians were sort of onto something. But so they took the Jews, they took the Jewish aristocracy, they took them to Babylon. According to tradition, they lived there for like 70 years. And around 586 BCE, they returned back. At some point, the leader was just like, okay, you guys can go back, rebuild your temple, you know, just go home. That's not really all there was to it, but that's kind of what happened. And when they returned back, they so we don't have all the information, but as part of this whole process, now they had a Torah and they had a story, and it wasn't that long after this that the Torah started to make its appearance. And so this story, this document, this is really where it comes from. It comes from this time. It was kind of, it was an act of, it's part of nation building, although there weren't really nations then. It was part of kingdom building. It was part of like the creation of the identity of a group of people who now, as part of their shared mythology, they had a written document. And it turns out that when you write something down, it changes everything. So if you're ever wondering about that, just try writing something down. Write down your life, write down the story of your life, and see what happens, because it's very interesting. It changes a lot when you write something down. For one thing, when you write it down, it becomes fixed. So whatever you've written, that becomes the codex. It may not be how you remember it. It may not be what actually happened. It may just be part of what you remembered. And then maybe part of it is what you wrote down while you were writing. Whatever. Once you've written it down, it's the codex. And now you've got to work with that. It's not going to move. It's not going to change. The only way it's going to change is when you change it. So you see, now that you've written it down, you've kind of frozen it in a way. And it doesn't unfreeze. And that's a big part of the problem with religious texts, is that then you've got to massage them and unfreeze them. So anyways, let's keep on going. I don't know how much of this we're going to get through today, but that's okay. We're just doing this week by week. This is actually how this is actually kind of how I learned to do Torah study anyways. Like many of the Torah studies that I've done in Jewish communities, like we'll get through like one or two verses and the rest of it you've just got to read on your own. And this is even worse because it's just me talking. So I don't know if I'm unbearable, but here it goes. Okay, Bereshit. I'll try to read a little bit and then I'll try to get back to it. I'm not sure how much we'll get to. So we just read verse 1, when God began to create heaven and earth. So, and again, so there's commentary right away. What does the commentary say? When God began to create. So there's actually a lot of commentary on that. It could be when God began to create the beginning. This isn't really it's like there's this idea that there's this thing that already exists. And here it is, it's creating. Anyways, I could probably spend a half an hour just talking about that. The earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface, and a deep wind from God sweeping over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning, a first day. So that's where we're at. The first 5 verses. I don't know how much of this I'm going to get through. Anyways, there's verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's a lot here. The best part of the Bible, of the Torah, I've always thought like the very very beginning of it is actually the best part, because it's like the rest of it is just like this unending story of God smiting the people and Moses cursing the people and the people sinning and people getting slayed and all the different reasons that you're supposed to stone your children and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like that's just like, where on earth did that come from? But here at the beginning of the Torah, there isn't any of that. There isn't even people yet, which is great. There's no people. It's just a planet. It's not even a planet. It's like, and it's really neat because this story, which is just a creation myth, it's a really nice creation myth. I mean, it's not the best creation myth, but it's a really good one. And it's different from other creation myths. So if you look at creation myths at the time, there were a lot of creation myths, and a lot of the creation myths started with gods who weren't really that interested in people, but sort of decided to make people to serve their interests. But they were sort of callous, and the world would get, and at the time, the world gets created because of some divinity who decides to make the world for some reason. It might just be some stupid accident or whatever. This is very different. Here you have this creation myth, you have this idea of a god, and when it starts, there's nothing, you know. Well, there's a god. So that's the first thing they do. They say there's a god. Which, as an atheist is very problematic because people, unfortunately, they look at this and they say, well, there it is, right there in the Bible, right there in the Torah. Oh, God, I'm going to have to edit that out. I was so good. Maybe I won't edit that out. I'm just going to leave it in. Anyways, in the Bible, in the Torah, it starts with there's a God. And it's like, okay, so as an atheist, like here's the very first problem you have reading the Torah is you start by saying that God created everything. And it's taken how many centuries of, scientific study and observation to understand how anything got created. This is the first problem with religion, is that you start by basically saying that God created. And when you start by saying that, you're kind of pushing people away from actually finding out the truth about the universe. And even now, even in modernity and postmodernity, whatever this time is, you still have to push back against this really old tradition that says that God created the universe. You have to push back against that. Like, even after everything that we've learned, after everything we understand, um, because religions kind of got the jump on this and in so many ways really delayed human development. I mean, really, just literally delayed human development, because when you start by telling everybody that there's a God and that the God is in control of everything and the God created everything, then it's easy. Your life is easy because it's all been explained for you. I mean, there's this invisible thing that took care of everything. He made everything and he made you. And this explains it all. It's great. So now you don't have to worry anymore. It's like it's all been taken care of. So you don't know anything. You just don't know anything, because the only way to know things is to study and to learn. I mean, you know something. You know about the people who created these texts and about the tradition. And that tradition actually comes from a good place. It comes from a place of wanting to give people some security and some meaning. I mean, this is a time when life was, it could be very uncertain. You never knew when the sea peoples were going to come and raid your village and, chop you all up into pieces. You didn't know when Egypt was going to come around, capturing, your town and taking you back to Egypt in bondage. You just, you didn't know when the next plague was over the hill, if you were going to starve or not. It's rough. I mean, a lot of these religious traditions started in agriculturally settled communities where people had a really rough existence and life was difficult and there wasn't a lot of education. And this was one of the best things they ever heard, and it does give people a lot of hope to imagine that there's something out there for them. It gives people a lot of hope. And so that's kind of where this is starting. I mean, it starts from a place, and as we go through the year of studying the Parsha, it's going to be important to understand that these religious texts come from a place. They come from something. And that something that they come from is very specific and it's really complicated and it has its reasons. And I think that rather than just writing it off like a lot of us do as atheists, I think, for those of us who are atheists, who are raised in religious traditions, it's easy to do. I mean, this isn't that hard for me to do. It's pretty easy to look at the tradition and to see how meaningful it is. If I was raised just as an atheist without religious tradition, I'd probably be less interested in this, and I probably wouldn't be wasting my time, honestly, doing this. But since I was raised with a religious tradition, this this is, it's a nice way of building a bridge between the two worlds because as far as I can tell, it's hard. There's not a lot of connections. I mean, there's not a lot of connections between the world that we actually occupy as atheists, which is a world where we're basically looking at all of this, we're deconstructing it, we're examining it, and we're just doing everything else we do in the world. I mean, we just exist during our lifetime. We don't need a God. We're happy to live without gods. It makes our lives better. We don't follow the dictate of any religion or tradition. We try to live the best moral lives that we can. And the world of religion, which is like, it starts with this. And it's an accumulation. It's happened over hundreds of years, thousands of years. It's an accretion of, untruths, mostly, mythologies that people have created into this giant ball of agreements that's like so tight it takes away women's right to their reproductive health. It shapes the entire agenda of nation states, and it's led to persecution. I mean, just insane, crazy persecution that has completely warped our meaning as a human species. So, all right, let's get back to it. So again, the God created the heaven and the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. Like whoever wrote this, oh, and another thing. So who wrote the Torah? Who actually wrote it? I mean, we don't know. So earlier at the beginning of this, we were talking about Moses. The best information I've come across is that the Torah was probably written by scribes within the court of the king of Israel. So the scribes there weren't that many people at the time who were literate. Oh, and also, how did literacy happen at the time? So how did people write? What did they write with? So, the best of our knowledge, Almost everything that happened around that time, people wrote on parchment. Um, Parchment is it's papyrus. It's this thing the Egyptians invented. They took papyrus, they mushed it up, they let it out to dry, they turned it into paper, they got ink, they wrote on it. And that was a radical invention. It was like the computer, or it was like your iPhone. It was this thing that completely transformed the culture, writing on papyrus. So the Torah, it was probably written on papyrus. Maybe it was written on animal skin. That's how our Torahs are today. By the way, I just want to tell you a little bit about, as long as I'm here, right now we're talking about Torah. So our Torah scroll in Jewish tradition is actually this big thing. It's about as big as a baby. It's maybe a little bigger than a baby. And it's this scroll. It's a continuous scroll. And it's written on animal hide. It's written on, you know, uh, skin. And it's been sewn together. Each section is, or hold it. No, just a minute. Oh, I'm going to have to go look that up now. I'm pretty sure a Torah is written on animal hide, but it may be parchment. I'm going to have to look that up. So don't quote me on that. Anyways, but I know it's a big scroll and it's the whole thing. It's like a book, but instead of being on a, thing like this, where it's, like this, it's a continuous sheet and it's rolled up on both sides, like a roll of toilet paper. It's just rolled up and you just kind of unroll it. It's like it's got two ends to it, and you just unroll one side and you unroll the other side. Like, anyways, I think you understand what I'm saying. It's a scroll. So that's what a Torah is. And uh, as Jews, we keep Torahs in a synagogue, and we take it out for like for Shabbat, and you read it then. And it's all in Hebrew. It's written from right to left instead of left to right. Um, it's all in Hebrew. And the reason it's in Hebrew is because Hebrew was the language that existed around this time. There's like a Proto-Hebrew, and then there's Hebrew, and then there's Aramaic. And it's written in this language. And then it's translated into English. A really good Jew can read Hebrew really well. They went to, day school, they learned Hebrew as a kid. Or if they're, really, if they're motivated, they study as an adult and they learn Hebrew. So it's all written in Hebrew. It's translated into English you know, for most Jews, but it's in Hebrew. Anyways, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from within, God sweeping over the water. So, you're trying to understand like exactly what are these people thinking. This is where the crazy flat earth people get the idea of the firmament from. They get this idea, they take it right out of the Bible. And it's nuts, because they're nuts. Flat earth people are completely nuts. And they're still trying to prove that the earth is flat. There's actually people still trying to do that. Unbelievable. But they get it from right here. And they get this from this idea, but they don't really understand the language. I mean, there's so many different things happening right here in this language because the, they're not just talking about the earth. Okay, they're not just talking about the earth. They're talking about something in the mind, and for people who study Judaism and who really believe in like Jewish tradition, or even for people who are into this, like who aren't Jewish, this is also something else too. This is something called mysticism. So here's where people right away they step off of the train and they get on another train, and it's called mysticism, and it's mysticism. Well, I mean, you probably know what a mystical tradition is. You probably understand that. This is part of a mystical tradition, and it starts right here. So the earth being unformed and void. So we're talking about the earth. I mean, it's kind of like this. Like if you're trying to imagine how the universe unfolded in your head, if you're trying to imagine going all the way back to the beginning of time, um, if you're trying to go all the way back to the beginning of time, and you're trying to imagine the because it's a really incredible story. I mean, let's go to a different Genesis for just a minute. Let's go to the Genesis of the universe. And we know that, and we understand this is true, even though we don't understand how it's true, but we know that in the first, 100,000th of a second of the expansion of the universe, like we know that at one point, the universe was about the size of a grapefruit. There was a point where the universe was even smaller than a grapefruit, when it was didn't even occupy any space at all. It was just we know that because all of our physics tell us that that's the truth. And then in like one fraction of a millisecond, it was like the size of a grapefruit, and then it just kept on going. And I mean, we know this is true. And but at the beginning of the universe, there weren't the building blocks of the universe as we understand them now. There wasn't matter as we understand it now. It was these elemental forces, this kind of superheated plasma. Now, if you play that out in your head, I mean, because that's the only way you can understand it. You play it out in your head. You're telling yourself a story about how the universe expanded. And the story is based on all of the observational data that we understand. But still, you have to create a story in your head, or you don't have to, but you do anyways. You're imagining it. And when you're imagining that story of that early universe, that's never existed. That's a story in your head you're telling yourself. And that story, which you trust because it's science, is an amazing story. I mean, when you try to imagine what an existence was like before there was anything material. I mean, not anything material. When the universe was these elemental forces, and when you try to imagine how those elemental forces, as soon as energy and temperature, as soon as the temperature of the universe dropped, and things kind of froze into a different state. I mean, as it was expanding, and the energy and speed at which it expanded. I mean, when you imagine that, and then the creation of the first stars, it's incredible. I mean, just thinking about the universe is just incredible. And that's what this is too. This is the same thing. This is the same thing. It's called mysticism in Jewish tradition. In scientific tradition, it's just called amazing. I mean, it may not be amazing to some people. It may just be, oh, that just happened. That's what happened. We figured it out. We studied it. It just happened. But it's amazing anyways. It's really amazing. So that's what this is too. It's the same thing. It's like the earth being unformed and void. That's great. That's the beginning of the universe. But it's not void. It's interesting though, because it's not void. But they're thinking, they're thinking. It's a good creation story. It's a really good creation story. With darkness over the deep. The deep what? Who knows? What's the deep? That's a good question. Think about it. What's the deep? And a wind from God sweeping over the water. So here you kind of get the first descriptor of a divine thing. It's a wind. So there's the very first thing. Now, it would have been nice if they'd left God there. Like if they just left God, God's the wind. That would have been good. because God is such a problematic character. I can't even tell you. It's so problematic. But if they just left it there, like the wind, God is the wind, that would be good. But and there's water sweeping over the water. So they imagined probably that there's water in the very beginning. God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. What do you know? All you got to do is say it. You just say it, and there it is. That's it. You don't have to do anything. You just say it. So I don't know. There's not much to say. There's actually a lot to say about that. It's like, so here's the character God again. So we've in the very first three verses, we've already had three gods. First, there's just the God. You don't know anything about him. He's just God. He's just there. That's great. That's a good way to start a story. There's just this guy. He's there. His name is God. Sorry to give it a gender, but in this tradition, it's a man. Not really. We'll get into that throughout the year, but not really a man, but here it's kind of a man. Anyways, it's just God. So the first three verses, you've got God. He's just there all of a sudden. There's no explanation, just there. And then God is what? There's the void, there's the darkness, there's the deep, and then there's God is the wind or something. Who knows? Maybe sweeping over the water. Like what? Like Superman again. Who knows? What is God? It's the wind. And then God speaks. So there you go. God spoke. So God can talk. How does he talk? Does he have a mouth? How does he speak? Does he have a head? Is it just disembodied voice like from Star Trek or something? Who knows? Anyways, but God speaks, and the first thing God says is, "Let there be light." So you don't have to know anything about nuclear fusion. You don't have to know anything about the collapse of gravity. You don't have to understand photons, radiation. You just say it, and there it is. Good start. Good start. But this, oh my God, so many connections here. So God, this God, is connected to a sun god. So he's not a sun god, but right away he's connected to a sun god. So the first time the god speaks, he's connected directly to the sun. And that's like one of the oldest forms of, worship on earth. People have been worshiping the sun since they started worshiping things for whatever reason. Oh, God. Okay, we're already at 53 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of tell you what the rest of the text is, as if you don't already know. I'm not going to comment on the rest of it because I want to put a couple of things in here. I want to end by about 58 or 59 minutes. So the rest of the text is, let's see how it keeps on going. So God separates the light from the darkness. He calls the day night, and then the water, and then he separates the water, and he makes the earth and the sky, and then he creates land. So he makes Pangea. Pangea. I'm just not going to get through all this. There's too much. Then God creates the animals. Then he creates the plants, and then that's just 3 days. Oh boy, there's a lot here. I probably need about 2 hours to do this. Then I'll just kind of go from memory here. So then God, on the seventh day, God creates Shabbat. That's what Jews practice. We practice Shabbat. Shabbat is, it's Saturday. It's just a day, but it's every 7 days, and it's supposed to mark the end of creation. It's like it's a day when you're supposed to just rest. So I'm actually making this on Shabbat, which is kind of kind of my way of paying homage to that tradition. And we as Jews have a whole set of rules around how you do Shabbat. Like, you're actually not supposed to, if you're really Orthodox, you're not supposed to burn a candle on Shabbat. So you're not supposed to actually have anything like, some people even say you shouldn't have electricity. But, I'm an atheist, so what do I care? No, I care a little bit. I pay attention. But, there's all these things you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to work. You're supposed to go to the synagogue. Um, you're supposed to read Torah. You're supposed to do mitzvot. I'll tell you later on what a mitzvot. Anyways, all this stuff. It's all from right here in the Torah. It's like the very beginning of Bereshit. It's Shabbat, and it's supposed to be this way of marking the creation, and so it goes on. It goes on to it talks about Shabbat, and then pretty soon it makes people. It makes Adam first, the first man, Adam, Adam, whatever. And then later on, he makes Eve out of Adam's rib. That's one story. Makes Adam out of the mud, by the way. So in Jewish tradition, you're made out of mud, you know. So there you go. If you ever wondered, how did you get made? You're made out of mud. Yeah. And then if you're a woman, you're made out of a rib. So it can't get better than that. That's great. You're made out of rib. Anyways, and it makes all the animal. It just there's so much, and I just can't even get to it. I can't even get to a part of it. I just can't even do it. So this is Jewish tradition. This is atheist. It goes on. It talks about the whole first Parsha of the Torah is great. It's like you could write an entire book on it. I could do an entire year of atheist Torah study just on the very first Parsha, as you can see, because I only got through 3 verses. And there's like, I don't know how many verses. There's like 300 or 400 verses, 1,700 words. I can't even get through like 3 verses. So I'm just pathetic. What can I say? If you want to learn more about Atheist Torah, you can check me out. I'm on TikTok and I'm on YouTube at Atheist Torah Study. You're also welcome to write me an email. You can send me an email at atheisttorahstudy@gmail.com. I'm going to try to release a new episode of Atheist Torah Study every Saturday for a year. This is a year-long project for me. So we'll be going through an in-depth exploration of the Torah 1 week at a time. If you want to learn more about the Torah, I would encourage you to go to Sefaria. It's sefaria.org. It's a really great resource for learning about Jewish tradition. So, and if you want to learn about atheism, you can go anywhere. It's all around, I don't even know who to recommend if you want to learn more about atheism. Write me and I'll tell you. Anyway, so thank you so much for joining me for my very first edition of Atheist Torah Study. Again, my name is Emma, and it's been a pleasure studying Torah with you. So I hope that if you've watched this all the way through, which I wonder if anybody will actually watch this, but if you do watch this all the way through, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again so much.